Podsmacked? Now, here's Rob Carson.
Here I am, ladies and gentlemen, and are you ready to be Podsmacked? I'm not sure if Luke Rosiak is ready to be Podsmacked. Have you ever been Podsmacked before, Luke Rosiak?
Never.
Never been Podsmacked before. Well, congratulations. You are going to be Podsmacked today. Welcome to the show, guys. Glad to have you here. We do have a special guest on the show, somebody who I've respected for many years as a true journalist. Luke Rosiak is a gumshoe, for lack of a better cliche, true journalist of the classic standard, somebody who cares about truth, who approaches it without partisan politics. He's written his first book, which I think is extraordinary, Extraction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats. Luke, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you on.
Great to see you again, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'll just set things up here. The first time I was exposed to your work was a piece that you did for the Washington Times. I believe it was about the Washington metro system. Nepotism and racism involved in that. That was crazy. I'll never forget it. What, with regard to that story, what sort of fallout happened to you after that deep dig on the D.C. metro system?
Well, basically, the funniest thing that happened was one of the top people at Metro wrote this letter quoting Whitney Houston and saying, don't let this mean guy hurt your feelings. But the letter was riddled with typos and, it was just really pretty comical. Nothing's changed. Some people said it was racist to point out that the place is 99% black. I had all the statistics. Yeah. There were few, and so nothing ever changes, Rob. But pretty wild story. I agree.
And people getting out of jail and immediately being hired by the metro system. That was a lot of fun too. So it was a great story. Let's talk about this story. This is the story of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and at least 42 Democrat members of Congress getting tied up with particularly three main individuals, one of them being Imran Awan and his two brothers as IT consultants, which exposed some major players in Washington, D.C. to the possibility of theft of emails, possibly uncovering government secrets. Tell us how this all started out, Luke, and how did you get involved with it?
Well, so there's this Pakistani guy working as a systems administrator running the servers for 20% of congressional Democrats. And basically, I see a little press release that's like right when Donald Trump's inauguration is going on. And it just kind of says something happened. These guys are in a little trouble, but we're not going to say what their names are or what they did. And so that's a classic. They call it a news dump here in Washington, where you got to get something out there and you try to slip it under the radar when there's a lot else going on. And so every other reporter in Washington is freaking out about the inauguration of Donald Trump. And I think, IT guys getting in trouble. I mean, technology and politics, that's kind of been a big thing lately. So I figure out who these guys are. And immediately it starts looking really bad. I mean, they've got all these hidden shell companies that they're running that are like funneling money from all different places. One of them is called CIA, if you can believe it. That's the name of the company. And they use it to take $100,000 from an Iranian government minister who's actually been connected to Hezbollah while they are working for the members of the Intelligence Committee. And then I find that, they've got one of them stole the identity of an intelligence specialist on Capitol Hill. And the problems go on. And basically, these guys are the most sketchy guys you've ever seen in your life. And then on top of all that, Congress caught them funneling data off the House network, logging into members of Congress's personal accounts, and doing things in a way that was designed to keep from being caught. But eventually they were caught. The problem was that even then, basically Nancy Pelosi got involved and tried to make the whole thing go away because they got caught the same exact week, if you can believe it, as the DNC emails got hacked and went on to WikiLeaks. So that's the very first week when the Democrats start to build this very deliberate narrative about Russia and Trump to try to make sure that Hillary Clinton wins. Okay. when they've got this news story about Wasserman Schultz, but it's a Pakistani hacker in the house.
Okay, so that's and I've been saying this for a very long time, Luke, the whole Russia collusion with Donald Trump has been a distraction. Now, I've always said it is a distraction from Uranium One. I've always said it is a distraction from the $150 million the Clinton Foundation got from Russian oligarchs following that. You're saying that this is directly tied into a distraction from this.
It would have been a distraction from the distraction, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I recall, and I want to get into this, Debbie Wasserman Schultz lost a laptop. I want to get into that in just a few. When I first started reading your book, Luke, it looked like a petty larceny kind of thing with this Aswan gentleman and his two brothers getting hired using, I believe it's Yvette Clark's office, to purchase high-end electronics at a major discount and possibly make some money off that. I remember reading the part where somebody went into, Wendy Anderson went into Yvette Clark's office and saw all of these glorious devices. I mean, it looked like Christmas, you said in your book. Tell us what maybe this started as with Imran Awan and his brothers, and what it eventually segued into.
Well, so it's like a lot of investigations when, the cops may see you doing something wrong and they follow the clues and it turns out you're doing something much bigger. Yeah. The way that this happened is a lot of people in the House, Democratic employees, began to be concerned that these guys were stealing equipment. And so a lot of them, basically investigators got involved and found out not only is equipment disappearing and they're, defrauding the House and cooking the books in Congress, but they're also taking data off the network and doing other things. And so later on, the media tried to act like this was some kind of, like the guy Imran Awan said, of course, I'm being picked on because I'm Muslim. Yes. But the book kind of starts, it builds up slowly, and it's like Democrats in the House become concerned, but some of the whistleblowers are retaliated against and things like that. So the investigation goes from stealing to hacking. But then later on, it turns out that, this guy's relatives will tell me he's been sending computer equipment to Pakistani government officials for years. Yeah. And now we know, obviously, where that equipment came from, the House of Representatives.
And we've got, like I said, 42 members of the House, Democrat, 1/5 of House members from the Democrats, who were involved with the House Committee on Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, a wealth of information that could have been stolen, some of it exposed on WikiLeaks. Do you suppose that Mr. Awan and his brothers began to realize that maybe they got into this because they thought they could make some money, and then realized that maybe they could sell intelligence to the Pakistani government and others? Is that what you saw ultimately from this? Yeah,
and it's really interesting as I build this guy's character out. I mean, this is really like a sociopath. Like, this is a deranged, horrible, horrible person who is very charismatic and savvy, and he ropes you in, and he seems really smart and fun, but then he double crosses you. And the motivation is money. So personally, I don't think that this guy has ideological, he's not a terrorist, but would he sell anything? Would he sell data to those people? Absolutely, in a second. And so this book has so many examples of just the insane things that this guy would do for money. And meanwhile, you got data flying off the network in total violation of the House rules.
Talking to Luke Rosiak, obstruction of justice, how the deep state risked national security to protect the Democrats. One of the things you said at the beginning of the book was that the Democrats are conniving and devious. The Republicans are just gullible and kind of stupid. And then there were some heroes in the book who actually risked a lot to come forward and tell you some of these things. And again, it's all about really the deep state in Washington, D.C. Explain what you meant by Republicans, Democrats, and heroes.
That's a great question. I mean, because, you see the title and, it's easy. Sometimes the Democrats want to paint it as some kind of a partisan book, but the Republicans really do come across as worse in this. I mean, they were lazy. They were trying to kind of phone it in and do their jobs just half-heartedly. They didn't want to stir up a lot of drama. They wanted to go along to get along. You got to work with all these people. Washington is ultimately a pretty small town. And there weren't Republicans really who had the courage to speak up. And a lot of people knew what was going on, and they said they were so concerned, but they all hoped someone else would do it. And so meanwhile, the Democrats are like working very hard and very expertly to set traps and manipulate people and, lie and spin the media. And that's how they ultimately, make sure that Paul Ryan, who was after all in charge of the House, kind of didn't expose this whole thing. And that's ultimately how they got the FBI and the DOJ to do what the Democrats wanted them to do, which was to throw this case.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a lot to digest for those who haven't read the book. I did my homework, and I haven't digested it all. But Imran Awan and his three brothers were involved in the Capitol building. They were working with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who, by the way, didn't do anything about this. Imran and his brothers were fired before Debbie Wasserman Schultz ever did anything. We're going to get into Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop in just a second, Luke. I do want to talk about that. But I do also want to mention some other things. Imran, this guy, I mean, he's a shyster. Okay, he's a shyster. And one of the things that he had some rental properties, and I remember reading there's a gentleman named Andre Taggart. And I don't want to get so deep into this because, I just got into the book. Tell me about this guy and what he found at one of the rental properties of this man who's as close as anybody can be in the Capitol building to Democrats. What did this guy who was renting a property from Imran, this guy, what did he find?
Well, so Imran is under the summer of 2016, okay. But they don't want to arrest him until after the election. So in the meantime, they claim that they're doing a sting, but really he knows he's being watched, and so he's trying to destroy evidence and everything like that. He's got a lawyer, even though he hasn't been charged, and so he moves out of his house and starts preparing to flee the country. Yeah. He rents his house to this guy, this black Marine who moves in, and right after he moves in, this lawyer starts bullying this guy. Like, you have all these devices in your house, like these electronic devices. You better give them back or we're going to sue you. And he's like really upset about it, like desperately trying to get this stuff back. And so the Marine finds like a bunch of old hard drives and like BlackBerry phones and stuff. And so he realizes, this lawyer, something's up. Why do they want this stuff back so badly? Uh-huh. So he calls the cops, and it turns out the FBI shows up and takes all the devices. And it turns out that this was a former aide to Hillary Clinton, who's the lawyer, who's like bullying this guy. And so later on, the FBI, they're all like, oh, this guy didn't give us anything. He gave us like an old car radio. And so it's like, that was the first kind of, this guy is like, why does this lawyer want to get these devices back so much? And he knows what a car radio is. I mean, this guy isn't an idiot. And so that's like one of several instances in this case where evidence just disappears when it gets in the hands of the FBI.
Well, yeah, and we all know what happens with the FBI, with Jim Comey and others involved in the 2016 election. A couple of other things that I thought were interesting. Something about government computers ending up in an elevator shaft. What's that all about?
So it's more, there's so many instances of what seems like obvious evidence tampering in this because they know they're caught. And so they're stealing like all this equipment, like $100,000 goes missing from one congresswoman's office alone, and they can't find any of it, and no one can say where this stuff is, and they delay, and finally they take investigators to this abandoned elevator shaft on Capitol Hill, and they point down there and they say, look, there it all is, and there's like a ton of boxes of new equipment. And so all the investigators said, well, obviously they used this time that they were stalling to go buy a bunch of new crap and throw it down there and say it was been there all along. And so suddenly they're just like, oh, well, I guess it wasn't stolen. The stolen goods reappeared later. Another example of that is they find that these guys have especially been hacking the House Democratic Caucus server. So there's one particular computer that's really sensitive, and that's the group that they're really targeting. Uh-huh. And so they know they're under investigation. They know there's this official report in the House of Representatives that says this computer is key evidence. And then a few months later, the cops find that server has disappeared.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the laptop, the Debbie Wasserman Schultz laptop. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about this, but apparently the main character in this whole thing, Imran Awan, He planted it. He planted it in a phone booth in the Capitol, right? Tell me about how this laptop plays into everything here.
Well, so they catch this guy hacking, like I said. They leave him on the network until after the election. And like right as Donald Trump is being inaugurated, they finally ban these guys from the network, but they don't arrest them. And so they're running around free. They know they're in trouble. They know what they did, but they're free. And so this guy's he's supposed to be, in the House doing computers. He comes in the House of Representatives anyway at midnight, takes Debbie Wasserman Schultz's computer. And this is after she's, been fired from the DNC after that hack. He takes Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop and leaves it in a phone booth at midnight for police to find. And so the police take it as evidence because they know it's attached to this guy they're investigating for hacking Congress. Yeah. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it happens to be on the committee that's in charge of the Capitol Police. So she starts going insane on the Capitol Police chief, saying he's going to be fired, and there's a video of it, and the video has been on the news, and she's like, there's going to be consequences if you don't get my laptop back. Now, I was the only one kind of saying in advance what this is all about, that her laptop was taken by this suspect when he's not even supposed to be in Congress. Yeah. And they weren't going to tell us anything about that. So later on, nothing happens with this guy. He's never charged despite all the evidence, and the media tries to spin it, and the FBI is like, oh, nothing, trust us. Like, it's all no big deal. But there were so many completely insane things that happened that no one was ever going to tell us about. The head of the DNC's laptop being stolen by a current hacking suspect and winding up in a phone booth. A lot of this stuff in this book is like right out of James Bond. And when I was writing this story, this book, it was a surreal experience, Rob. I felt like I'm in a movie.
It's cloak and dagger stuff, dude. When I'm reading this, I'm like, are you kidding me? It sounds like a movie script, but you know what? They were right. John Grisham was right. Let me ask you about the Verizon kiosk at the Longworth House Office Building. And this sounds to me, I actually, in the early 90s, I cut my teeth on political satire with the Capitol Hill Bank scandal and the Capitol Hill Post office scandal.
Very relevant to this.
Writing stuff for Rush Limbaugh. That's where I started to write political satire. This sounds like the Verizon version of the Capitol Hill Bank. Tell me about this.
So that's kind of when the book is building up and showing how the clues started with something petty and eventually led to something big. But the key takeaway there is there was a lot of incompetence on Capitol Hill by the people in charge. And so one of the things that happened is when these Democratic staffers who were from Pakistan got caught doing all these horrible things, the Democrats wanted to make it go away. And what they did is they went to the Republicans and they were like, hey, you guys were in charge of the House. You're the idiots who didn't stop this. I mean, look at all the rule violations, Paul Ryan. Are you some kind of moron? Why didn't you stop this? Yeah. And so the Republicans look at what happened and they're like, oh my God, you're not kidding. This is completely incompetent what happened. And so the Democrats get the Republicans on the defensive for this really frightening national security scandal that really is entirely focused on Democrats. But the truth is the House of Representatives has always been very, very poorly run, dating back to the 1990s. And this is the latest example of that. Only now, instead of scheming on the post office and the bank like they were 20 years ago, now you're involving computers and data, and so it's a lot more frightening.
More free stuff, free stuff, and this time it's even more. Yeah, it is more frightening because it's in the ether, the phones and the cloud and all of that stuff. That's what makes it even more frightening, and it's unbelievable. We've got a couple of other things here as the case progresses, and Imran Awan essentially, I mean, he hasn't really paid the price for anything. It sounds like originally it was a grift and could have gotten a lot worse. Ultimately, distill everything here. What has happened to us? Why is this so important? And particularly with the government covering it up and the media covering it up.
So this is a story that, like I said, it's out of a movie, and it's real life. The things that happen are just completely insane. No one was going to tell us. And just a lone reporter, I'm finding documents, crucial sources that really everyone would, key sources, well-placed, evidence, documents, pictures, proof. And this stuff was all concealed from us. So it's all part of the same 2016 narrative where the Democrats were very much building this thing about Russia, and it's now turned into the Robert Mueller. And it's really subsumed most of Donald Trump's presidency is talk about this whole Russia business. It didn't happen that way. You know, the media writes it like investigators are looking into this or that. And so that becomes the narrative because they peg it, they frame it using what the DOJ is doing. And so it turns out that there's this kind of alliance between Democratic public relations masters and the media and the FBI and the DOJ. And it's all this. We're really being puppeteered as an American people, and we're manipulated. And what we think is a big story and what we think is crazy and didn't happen, I mean, that is it doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of intentional sort of machinations. So this book, first of all, shows this insane story that I think is just really interesting to read. Because I like to be entertained. I like to watch TV, watch movies. I don't like to read books that are like lecturing me or just talking about opinion. This is a drama from start to finish. But the real key is that it shows how it shows how the deep state works, right? And so next time you see the FBI corruption in the news or DOJ being sketchy and working with the Democrats, this book really shows how they operate, what their techniques are, so we can, know how we're being manipulated next time and call these people on it.
One of the things that you did, and I liked the narrative you drew from the beginning of the book, talking about 4th of July in Washington, D.C., to going to Mr. Awan's house. And I remember, and this is what makes it so good, and I really enjoyed the book, Obstruction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats, Luke Rosiak joining me, how you went to look at his garbage, and you were kind of sleepy, and you lit a cigar, and the smoke met the cool air that night. I just love the way you wrote that, and you took his garbage, and tell me about that, because I heard you talking to Hannity about this the other day. Tell me about digging through his trash, man, because this is wow.
Yeah, I mean, because that's real reporting. I mean, I found myself in the middle of this insane thing, and like the FBI is worse than ignoring it. They're like dismantling evidence and being super corrupt. The Democrats are ignoring. The Republicans are incompetent. The media is trying to act like I'm crazy because it wasn't their story. They probably wish it was. But all this stuff is verifiable, and here I am doing traditional reporting on a really big story, and I'm kind of like out in the wilderness, being like, look at what I'm finding. This is insane. Someone's got to do something. And I'm talking to people on the inside who are worried and who they're in the government and they know what's going on. Some of them are fired, retaliated against. Other witnesses are being like beat up. One of them is shot at after calling the cops on this guy. And here I am, just kind of a lone reporter trying to do really like what I thought was, kind of Woodward and Bernstein reporting, while some of these guys at the New York Times, they're just getting like stories fed to them by Fusion GPS, Hillary Clinton's Oppo research firm. So this is ultimately like, I think, blockbuster feat of investigative journalism that's really fun to follow along as we piece the clues together, because there's not enough, there's a lot of opinion out there these days, but there's not enough really good investigative journalism. And, it was fun to do, to be honest.
And the juices of the garbage fell into your son's car seat in the car.
And don't tell my wife that. I hope she's not listening.
I just think I appreciate what you do, Luke. I really, really do. With regard to this, before I got a couple more things I want to ask. The media complicity. You talked about the New York Times, the Washington Post avoiding the story altogether. Literally walking past Imran Awan. I think it was at an airport, or no, it was at a courthouse. He walked right past them, but they were more concerned about this Russian collusion story with Donald Trump. They didn't even pay attention to his court case, and it sounds like he pretty much got off scot-free, right?
Right, and the DOJ actually put out a statement saying he didn't do anything, and the media, reused that. They're just like bootlickers. They're like, oh my God, it's authoritatively stated, but like you can see the evidence, and a lot of the evidence is from official government reports and other public records. They could verify it, and here you have reporters who are blindly taking the word of the government instead of looking at the evidence, and so the discrepancy between first of all, what this guy did is horrible, and it really jeopardized national security. It's frightening and could have affected an election if it had emerged. But the idea that the government is just completely misrepresenting things to us, is really even more disturbing. And you wonder how often, after you read this book, how often is this occurring in other cases, in other aspects of our lives?
I think you need to read Obstruction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats, Luke Rosiak. Forward by Newt Gingrich, I noticed. Jeff Sessions, Mr. Magoo, that was one of your chapters. Tell me about Jeff Sessions stumbling and bumbling through this investigation.
Yeah, there's a name probably people were happy to not have heard for a couple months. But to your point about Newt Gingrich, he says this is the biggest scandal in congressional history, and he's Speaker of the House. He's well positioned to say that, and it really is a huge deal that was covered up. And here Jeff Sessions is in charge, and he basically blindly takes the word of the FBI. And even though there's things that congressmen and others were pointing him to, and they were like, look at this evidence that directly contradicts what the FBI said, and he didn't really have the interest in doing that. So it's this kind of blind acceptance of authority is kind of org structures and people just having kind of blind loyalty, and very few people were willing to just kind of look at the evidence and think for themselves. And so Sessions was completely useless. He knew about some things that Donald Trump would have been furious to know that he knew but failed to act on. And at the end of the day, he puts out this statement, his Department of Justice, saying, don't believe the media. This guy did nothing wrong. First of all, if you're someone, just a private citizen that the media is writing about, the DOJ doesn't put out a statement saying you did nothing wrong. That statement in itself showed that the government was protecting this guy in an insane way. But so then the media says, Trump's own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has debunked Trump as a conspiracy theory. But it didn't debunk anything. I mean, it didn't say, here's where the confusion came from. Here's the explanation. There's no explanation. I mean, you've got all this evidence, and then they say, nothing to see here and move along. And so Jeff Sessions, the media was happy to use Jeff Sessions as a foil for Donald Trump. Yeah. But it's good that he's gone. I just worry that because of the deep state that's kind of illuminated in this book, and a lot of that is kind of lower level people that you wouldn't know. They're not household names, but they're very good at kind of puppeteering people and being very influential behind the scenes. I worry that those people are still in the DOJ and are going to be very difficult to eradicate. Whether we've got this new guy Barr or whoever in the DOJ. Yeah,
they are. Luke, you know that as well as I do. I was in D.C. when you were, and you're still there. And I believe the entire 2016 election was about draining the swamp, and literally Washington D.C. was built on a swamp. And I believe that there are people on either side of the political equation who do not like this president because he's upsetting the apple cart. He doesn't like that. They don't like the fact that 7 out of 10 of the richest counties in America surround Washington D.C. Federal employees make 70% more than the private sector. They are living large. People move to Washington, D.C., they become Congress people, they get book deals, and they walk millionaires. And that's what this is all about. You had some great quotes in your the finale of your book. Confronting the swamp means stepping into quicksand. The more you fight, the deeper it drags you down. You said, I am fatigued like everyone else. The swamp was too deep to drain. These are the things that you said. After going after this story, and again, I think it's terrific, what did you learn, and what are your thoughts now? Is this ever going to change?
Yeah, a lot of people say, well, is this Pakistani guy going to go to jail? And I said, look, we're well beyond that. I mean, this book is to shine the spotlight on the people who intentionally facilitated a cover-up for the sake of politics. I want to expose the DOJ people, the Democrats, including mid-level people that you would never heard of, from the highest to lowest levels. I want to name them. I want American people to know how they operate and who they are. Whether, honestly, Rob, whether that having that knowledge will be enough to stop it, I can't say that it is. And there's a certain element of this book, and you look at the cover and the title, and you might think it's an angry book. But I think I wrote it in a very empathetic way to the various figures. But at the end of the day, I think there's a certain sadness throughout the whole book, because we were let down by a lot of people that we trusted to keep us safe and to put the nation's interest over their own interests. And there's a lot of self-serving people in D.C. who would rather, put their own personal convenience over anything else, no matter how bad it is for the country. And, I don't know how we get out of this. I think that Trump came across as better than most of the Republicans in this book, but ultimately there's not a lot of optimism at the end of it, is there?
When I look at this president, and I'm not meaning to make this just a rah-rah for Donald Trump, but I thought kind of, at least right now, the last great hope for draining the swamp and exposing this crap. You've done a great job of it as well. Let me ask you this, Luke, before we go. Did you ever feel threatened? Because I know there were some people who were threatened. I know there were some people who were even assaulted. Did you ever, as you delved deep into this, did you ever, this is back to the clandestine kind of John Grisham kind of thing. Did you ever get the call and watch what you're doing and click hang up? Did you feel threatened at all while you were doing this investigation?
Yeah, I never did personally. I what I saw was people getting at witnesses so that to try to get them to not talk to me.
Wow.
And so the intimidation is going on upstream, and a lot of witnesses harassed, frightened, retaliated against. And, this was heavy stuff. And they want you to read it in the Washington Post and say, oh, that's all crazy. None of that ever happened. Yeah. That was all very deliberate. And it's through that campaign of retaliation. But luckily I myself, I'm still alive to talk to you, Rob.
Yeah. Now, Imran Awan, I just want to real quick, his wife, she was a hero in all of this, and she's basically, her life has been really, kind of ruined by this, right? She's a hero. Yeah. She's one of the heroes that you pointed out in your book.
And of course, the Washington Post is saying that this is all about Islamophobia, and actually at one point they said it was anti-woman because Debbie Wasserman Schultz is involved. The whole time.
Is she a woman? No, sorry. Did I let
There's all these women.
Go ahead.
There's all these women who are coming to me, who are related to Imran Awan, who are like, you got to help me. This guy is controlling me with death threats. He's blackmailing me. Yep. He rigged my house with hidden cameras. Yep. One of them being blackmailed by a sex tape. Yep. The other one, she's held in captivity because she can't drive, and he's listening to her phone and movements. And, he threatens her to kill her family if she leaves the house. And so these people are like, you got to help me. And they go into the cops, and the cops aren't helping them. The FBI won't do anything. The FBI is publicly saying, it's all crazy. This is a great guy. He's being picked on because he's a, Muslim or Democrat or whatever. And these women are just left to hang out to dry. Yeah. And so the wife, and by the way, when your own spouse is telling the FBI that, you're admitting to being a mole in Congress, that is, not good. Everyone who knows this guy is very, very frightened of him. Yeah. And that was honestly kind of a burden on me to have these people and be trying to help them. Yeah. And I can't explain why I'm telling them, look, it's not like Pakistan. In America, when people make death threats and things like that, there are repercussions. And it turns out that I was wrong, and our justice system is probably more like Pakistan than we thought.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Luke, it was a real pleasure talking to you. And to those who just were watching the podcast, listening to the podcast, there's a lot to digest, and there's so much more in the book. I just think it's fascinating. I didn't realize how much truth resembled fiction, Luke, until you exposed it to me in this book. It is obstruction of justice, how the deep state risked national security to protect the Democrats, and the Republicans played along. That's another thing. Luke, a real treat. Bravo, my friend, on your first effort as an author, and I know many more books are yet to come.
Thank you, Rob.
All right, have a very good day, my friend. I greatly appreciate it. And again, I can't tell you. I just think I think what he's done is fascinating, and I think that true journalism lives and breathes with this guy. I want to thank you for joining me today, guys. If you get a chance to check out tpublic.com conservatees, you'll see my swag line there, including Hillary in 20 Never, among other things. In the meantime, God bless you. See you again real soon, and make sure to share this with your friends on social media. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to The Rob Carson Show. Friend him on Facebook at Carson Show, on Twitter at Rob Carson, and on Instagram, I think Facebook and Twitter are enough for now.